Sit here? Nobody in the middle? Huh? Nobody in the middle?
If I screw up somehow, just fill in for me.
Huh? The what?
If I screw up somehow.
Oh, yes. Let me get rid of these. Okay. Yeah.
Going to wait for a cue from our people back there. Let me know, Albert, when we want us to start. We're good? All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Fletcher Theatre here at SFU Harbour Centre, and those watching us online. On behalf of the Courier, Vancouver is Awesome, and Business in Vancouver, welcome to the first 2018 Mayoralty Debate. I'm Kirk LaPointe, Editor-in-Chief of Business in Vancouver and Vice President of Editorial at Glacier Media, and I wish, of course, to acknowledge that we are on the unceded ancestral territory of the Coast Salish people. Over the next 2 hours, our journalists are going to ask questions of 8 of the candidates vying for the office of Mayor of Vancouver. The candidates are going to face each other in debate, and we hope that by the end of this evening, you're going to have a better understanding of their ambitions and ideas for the city. Our format tonight is going to include questions directed to groups of 2 or 3, and then we'll also have some individual questions throughout the evening for the candidates. Our candidates have no foreknowledge of what will be asked, and because I might have had a conflict of interest perceived, I don't know either. Only our journalists know. There will be 12 rounds of these group questions, and the format will go as follows. 2 or 3 of the candidates that I will ask to stand for the questions. One is going to be asked a question and be given 2 minutes to answer. The other candidates in that round will be permitted 1 minute each to respond, and then the candidates in that round will have 2 minutes to debate each other. The math on this means that there's actually 4 candidates who are going to be asked questions first twice, and we're going to limit those answers to 60 seconds. I'm sure I've lost you in this because I actually lost myself in deciding it. In addition, we're going to have one-to-one questions for individual candidates who will each be asked a question and be given 60 seconds to respond, and of course, no other candidate will weigh in on that. I'm going to be the timekeeper. I'm going to cut you off at the limit. I want to introduce our candidates in alphabetical order. Hector Bremner. Galak Boudet. David Chen. Fred Harding. Ken Sim. Kennedy Stewart. Shauna Sylvester. And Wei Young. Now we're going to dispense with opening statements, and we're going to go right into round one. I first want to introduce Mabel Connor and Mike Howell, moderators for this first series of questions. We drew on Friday for when the candidates will appear, and actually I'm going to try to get these microphones over here for the three that will start. Candidates 1, 2, and 3 are in this round. So Mr. Bremner, Kennedy Stewart, and Fred Harding, please step forward. Grab a mic. There we go. Check. Excellent.
Check, check.
The microphone, the microphones are in hand, and they're going to be handed off after every round. The first question is going to go from the Courier to Mr. Bremner.
Okay. Everybody can hear me okay back there? Right on. Okay. Surprise, surprise, we're going to start with housing. Specifically renters I want to talk about. I want to hear from you about this. As all of you are aware, up on there on stage, more than 50% of the people who live in the city are renters. Many live in precarious situations tied to the whim of a landlord and the provincial rules that allow annual rent increases. If elected, what measures will you implement at the city level to bring some relief to renters?
Mr. Bremner, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here and participating in this, and thank you for everyone for putting your name forward and being a part of this. This is a really wonderful exercise, and I got involved as a renter myself and a father of 2 kids that were born in the city that can't afford to live in the city. For 10 years ago, or even 4 years ago, you used to be able to rent a basement suite in East Vancouver for about $800. And what has happened is that over the last 3 years, we've had a 30% increase of homelessness because a lot of seniors were counting on that type of housing. And it's tipped them out, and it's put them out in a really, really precarious position. And that's why I ran for office, and I got involved, and I saw the reasons why it was so broken. I was meeting builder after builder going, hey, look, why is it that I applied to build this Rental 100 project? Why is it that I applied to get more units, to get deeper affordability? And I was told no. So what we said was, we're going to take a 3-year action plan, and we're going to make sure that we put 50 to 70,000 new approvals on the books. Make sure that we're going to build rentals for the people that need it. And we're going to do it by making sure that we're going to prioritize, we're going to cut the red tape, we're going to drop the CACs, the community amenity contributions that have triggered so many rentals to be just turned over into condos. And we're going to get the job done, and we're going to get it done quickly. But the reality is that we cannot wait. Not wait another 4 years. And we can't take another piecemeal plan. It's got to be a part of a comprehensive plan. And this is just one piece of a broader approach that we're taking to make sure that we're going to be delivering affordable, middle-class housing for seniors all the way to the youth to make sure that we're a sustainable and resilient city.
Mr. Stewart, you have 1 minute.
Great. Well, this city's given me everything, and I love it. I'm a renter now, and when I moved here in 1989, I was able to rent basement apartments and get jobs and kind of make my way on my career. That's not possible now. So my plan is to build 85,000 units over 10 years. 60% of that would be for renters. 25,000 units would be operated by not-for-profits, and that would be affordable rent below market rate. 25,000 would be market rents. The other thing, though, is we got to look after current renters. And so last Wednesday I announced that we'd be bringing a renters advocate to the city who would be helping renters with their very complicated legal problems when it comes to rent evictions and other problems. So you can look at my platform, kennedystewart.ca. It is the most detailed plan, and I'm very proud to stand behind it.
Mr. Harding.
We have to look at working with the provincial government, of course. Most people know that 53% of the residents of Vancouver live in rental accommodation. 80% of that rental accommodation is 60 years old, 3 stories high, wood and timber, and in need of updating and renovations. The landlords can't afford to do when the landlords do the renovations, they can't afford they can't charge $1 more in rent. Perhaps now's the time to bring in some kind of grant program to get some of these places into order, make sure that they're better. We have to look at the CACs that are being applied to buildings. $43 million on one building alone. That gets passed on to rent. It's not sustainable, it's not tenable, and we really have to do something about the CACs. Vancouver First is going to reduce the CACs, if not eradicate them, for some special projects.
Candidates, you now have 2 minutes to mix it up.
Great. Well, I'd like to say there are 3 MPA candidates in this race, so you have your choice if you like. But Mr. Bremner's plan I'd like to focus on because he's saying he'll build 70,000 new units in 3 years. That's building a new coal harbor every 6 months. So that is bulldozing neighborhoods and building massive towers, and there's no protections against foreign speculators. So in my plan, I've said that I'll protect up to 50% of the housing stock from speculation, and I'm just very worried about the vision Mr. Bremner's putting forward.
Our plan, sorry, I was just going to say, our plan is to make sure, don't forget, the city's already said, allocated 72,000 homes between now and 2027. The provincial government has already allocated 114,000 homes across the province in the next few years. We have to also give those plans time to take effect so that we can make a proper assessment of what it is that we need to do in Vancouver as well.
So I didn't know that renters could be speculators, but I think that we said very clearly in our plan, it was mentioned before, someone had the more comprehensive plan. I mean, we, against all my instincts as a communications professional, we dropped a 49-page substantive document that is a clear path to middle-class prosperity again in this city, and so the issue here is not bulldozing neighborhoods and fear-mongering and dividing people in such a way and throwing in the word speculator and foreigner just for good measure, just to scare you up. No, my friends, one of the first things that I did when I was elected was went into the mandated mansions. So you want to protect the mandated mansions, that's fine. You want to protect mandated mansions, that's fine. But I could have delivered 15,000 new apartments
these two
with
gentlemen
6
have been in
stories
politics
right on
for
the
a
edge of
long
UBC.
time. We have a current councillor, and we're still working with an official city plan from 1938.
It's 27.
Was it in place in 1938?
It was in place in 1938, but it's from
We're still working with a plan that was in place in 1938. I was good at some.
Okay, candidates, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Candidates 4, 5, and 6, so Ken Sim, Shauna Sylvester, and David Chen. Step forward and get a microphone in the 3 sitting. This question starts for Mr. Sim.
Okay. We have a housing question for you. Tomorrow night, there's a public hearing at City Hall to determine whether duplexes will be permitted in most single-family neighborhoods. And in the coming months, city staff will also look at the possibility of allowing triplexes, fourplexes, and apartments in low-density neighborhoods. What forms of housing do you think should be permitted in single-family neighborhoods, and why?
Mr. Sim, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I just want to state, first of all, thank you for all the candidates for coming out and, running for office. I think that's great. And I really like everyone here. But but at the end of the day, I really like Shauna. I am the only candidate running today who actually has extensive experience running a large, complex organization. We have over 5,000 employees in 200 locations across North America, so I know how to get things done. To your question, I think the bigger question is there has been no real consultation process that has happened. The Vision government is actually trying to ram something through our city that will fundamentally change the way our city looks like without consulting residents, and that is a big problem. When it comes to, thank you. Thank you very much. When it comes to type of housing, I would actually like to leave it up to the residents to decide. So what we're going to do is we are going to come up with a citywide plan. We are going to talk to all the residents. We're going to engage the residents, and they're going to tell us what they actually want to build in their communities. And the next question I get is, well, Ken, they're a bunch of NIMBYs. Everyone's going to say no. That has not been my experience. If you go to Commercial Drive, I will be the first person who will say we don't want a 20-story tower right on Commercial and Kitchener. And all the residents will agree, the business owners will agree as well, and even some of the property owners would agree. However, if you ask that same group of individuals how they felt about a tower going up or a 20-story condo tower going up on the Broadway Commercial subway station in that area, they would all agree. And so I think we underestimate the residents of Vancouver. They actually have a deep love for their city, they care about their city, and they're sane. And so I have a problem with what the Vision government is trying to ram through right now with no consultation.
Ms. Sylvester, 1 minute.
Thanks so much. So the making room policy comes very, very late in the mission mandate. It's hard to understand why it's being ran through in the last month. The idea, though, came out of the Mayor's Task Force on Affordable Housing way back in 2012. This is not a new idea. It's been coming up time and time again. But it's wrong in one particular way. It does say let's upzone and let's enable different kinds of forms, new kinds of forms on single-family lots. But what it fails to do is provide an affordability mechanism for that upzoning. So what we're doing is we're increasing supply, and we're not ensuring that the affordability is there. And that's the problem with this particular policy. So I'm very much in favor of engagement, but I'm also recognizing that we have a housing crisis. People can't live. We can't wait years as every resident gets to have a decision on what kind of housing we want.
Thank you, Ms. Sylvester. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chen.
Thank you. So, forgive my voice. I'm sick right now, so I've lost my voice. But first, I'd like to acknowledge we're on unceded territory of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam peoples. So, first of all, what I have to say is that Patrick Condon and Scott Hine have always advocated for a community plan. You cannot build anything without having a cohesive plan that's been put together by experts and has been consulted with the communities. The problem is, it's like if you have a bunch of people with no rules and you ask them, what do you want? They're going to ask for everything under the sun. And as a Vancouver born and raised, I can tell you, if you talk to the planners and you walk the streets, you'll find out we have queued streets. We don't have capacity. So you can't just open up the floodgates to development without some cohesive plan. So first, what must happen is we do need to go neighborhood by neighborhood, have a community plan, go to consultation, ask the people, are you okay with this?
Candidates, you have 2 minutes.
All right, so I just wanted to, thank you. I wanted to respond to Shauna. So a couple of things. Vision rammed this through. You're still
Let's
part
agree
of,
on that.
okay, and
Let's
you're,
agree on
but
that.
you're part of Vision as well.
No, I am not part
of the Vision
Ken,
party, so.
2011,
Okay.
get over it.
All right.
Yeah.
The second thing, okay, and so, but you agree with their policies because you're supporting it.
No, actually, I
So-
don't agree.
so-
Ken, I want to
but
make
the-
it really clear where I stand on this, because that is what is important. Each of you are talking about going through this relentless community planning process. Right now, only 25% of our city has community plans, and guess who's absorbing all of the density in the city, all the growth? Those with a community plan. So we have to create a situation across this city where we, yes, enable community plans, yes, enable consultation, but at the same time, we've got a housing crisis that we have to deal with. I can't continue to see my kids leave. I can't continue to see the bleeding going on, the hemorrhaging. How many young people are leaving because we're not investing?
Let's step back for
and
a
that's
second.
the issue.
No, but
Let's step back for a second here.
just on that,
How many people in this room are actually going to the public hearing tomorrow? Myself, the whole Pro Vancouver team is. If you're not, you are not for the people. This is an undemocratic process. You can talk all you want, but if you haven't signed up for that public hearing, you are not for the people. You can still sign up. It goes on until the evening. They've
30
already
seconds, candidate.
spilled it over into another day.
And so let's say it makes sense to actually go and take a bulldozer to the city and have duplexes,
No one
triplexes.
is
Hold on, let me
suggesting
finish, let me
that.
finish.
No one's suggesting
This
that.
is still going to take years, even if you started today. That problem you're trying to solve is not
That's
going to
not
get solved
helping my daughter.
immediately.
Ken, that's not helping my daughter.
And that's
It's
why
not
we
helping
love
so
the
many
two
others.
secondary suites. It will provide almost immediate relief and give us time to catch up. Your solution, why
How
you
about
may,
just
it may make sense in
accepting the
theory,
illegal
it's
suites that
not.
are already
Thank you
out
very
there
much.
and make them legal?
Thank you, candidates. Round 3 involves Wei Young and Golak Bade. Please step forward. The question is for Ms. Young. You have 2 minutes.
Ms. Young, I want to hear more from you on why you believe that bike lanes are divisive and discriminatory towards single moms and seniors. And then I want to hear Mr. Boudet's response to that and get his position on bike lanes in the city. And both of you tell me whether cyclists have a place under your governments.
I am so glad that you asked me that question. Thank you so much for that, because there's a lot of misinformation out there, actually, about our stance on bike lanes. And in fact, what happened just last night, is I received an email from a woman who is married to a 93-year-old veteran. She said that she was taking her husband to the emergency ward, and he has some issues with his feet, so he couldn't walk. And she was shocked to find that she could no longer park right on West 10th in front of the hospital to get him to emergency because he had an issue with his eye. And so she wrote me this very long email to say, why is it that we're not protecting our seniors? Why is it that we're not protecting our seniors and giving them access? And that encapsulated for me exactly our stance on the bike lanes. We are going to be tearing out 2 of the bike lanes, one in front of VGH, the redundant one on Cambie Street Bridge, and also not putting in the one that's going to be a 12-foot wide asphalt bike lane right through a picnic area in Kitts Beach. We've been very, very clear about that. That's what we're going to do with the bike lanes. We're going to audit the rest of the bike lanes, because some of them just don't make sense. And I've heard this from cyclists across the city, where some of them don't make sense. They dead end into nowhere, or they're blocking driveways. So they're very unsafe, not just for pedestrians, but they're unsafe for drivers as well as cyclists themselves, because I've heard directly from them. Thank you.
Mr. Bidet, 1 minute, please.
Well, I think largely the issue is how it's paid for and the way it's obviously planned and things like that of that nature. It's put on roads that are built for people who spend a lot on cars and licenses and insurance and so on, and things that cyclists don't have to pay for, and that's going to cause a lot of pain and agony. And the best idea might have been to give someone access to a lane and say that's your private lane, and if you fix the rest of the road up, you can run bikes across it or anything else so you want, luxury cars or supercars, whatever. That would be the only way you could probably pay for that, and maybe the road's a little better. I know, I find it amazing that they actually say this is about cyclist safety when they don't actually fix the potholes around town.
Thank you, Mr. Boudet. That's 1 minute. Candidates, you have a couple of minutes more.
And I agree with Mr. Boudet, because the bike lane in front of the Vancouver General Hospital cost $4.5 million. This is for 2% of the people that cycle in Vancouver. And so why should 98% of the people in Vancouver be blocked from accessing the hospital, be blocked from using our roads in the way that they're meant to be used? And so we have a very practical, a very common sense approach to the bike lanes, because we all know, everywhere you go in Vancouver, certainly in the last little while, people come to me and they say, those bike lanes don't make any common sense. Please fix them when you get to City Hall. And so I am actually really pleased to be asked this question, because 2% of the people are cycling and using those bike lanes at the detriment of 98. We should not have a private, elite, luxury roadway system that's paid for by the people, for just 2% of the population. That's not common sense.
There's not going to be a lot of acrimony on this. And I find it interesting that they didn't actually include mobility scooters and all that other, all the disabled equipment for these lanes. They just decided to do it for the cyclists. And I tell you, my father cycles all the time, and he says he doesn't like them. He'd rather drive with the cars. It's a lot safer. So
I think
I'll
that
listen
the
to the
point
cyclists I know.
is that the true cyclists do cycle on the road because they go according to the rules of the road.
And they know what
And
they're
one of the
doing.
key things that we're going to be that we have announced is our mutual respect policy. And our mutual respect policy is so that we can increase the knowledge and awareness of what are the rules of the road for the people that use them. And as you all know, and
Thank you
everybody
very much,
knows this in
candidates.
Vancouver. Thank you.
Ms. Young, you'll stay on stage. Mr. Sim and Mr. Bremner are also part of this round.
Oh, thank you, sir.
We have you thoroughly confused. That's great. The first question is for Mr. Sim again, but because this is the second time he's being asked a question, he will have only 60 seconds to respond, and the others will do the same.
Great. Mr. Sim, you're the NPA's mayoral candidate, and Mr. Bremner and Ms. Young, both of you had an interest at one point in becoming the NPA's mayoral candidate. Over the years, the party has made a sport of criticizing Mayor Gregor Robertson and Vision Vancouver for not reducing homelessness. So let's hear from each of you on what your plan is to reduce the number of people living on the street.
Mr. Sim, 60 seconds.
Yeah, it's been a complete travesty, the number of homeless people on the streets of Vancouver. And as Mayor of Vancouver, I am going to work incredibly, incredibly hard. I will actually camp out in Victoria and Ottawa to get funding from our partners in government. We'll be working with all of our cities, our regional cities, and we are going to solve this issue, or improve this issue, I should say. You know, it's if you've ever walked in the downtown Eastside, for example, and I know homelessness is a far broader issue, you see how much people suffer, and we have to be empathetic. Every single person there could be our brother, or sister, father, or mother. And so I know how to get things done. It's going to be hard, but we need someone to champion it and to actually take a stand and have political courage and not worry about getting reelected. And I'm not worried about getting reelected.
Thank you, Mr. Sim. Mr. Bremner, 1 minute.
Well, it was an interesting preface to your question, but yeah, it is true that, you know, it's been a bumpy year for democracy in the city of Vancouver. But I'm really proud of the team that we've put forward, and the positivity and the energy and the commitment to the 4 key principles, and that was that we were going to take the good ideas, we were going to bring people together, we were not going to play politics, and we were going to get the job done. And one of the biggest inspirations of this was our homelessness crisis. I live not just far from here, and I don't have a car. I walk to work in Gastown when I was working there. And, you know, my wife and I always remark that the thing that we hear in our neighborhood, 17 floors up, is loud cars, supercars. But you get down into the street level, and there's people sleeping there. It's not funny. There's an enormous amount of wealth in this city. We don't need to talk to Victoria. We don't need to talk to Ottawa. We have $97 billion of mortgage-free equity in the city. We need to unlock it, and we need to get people housed.
Ms. Young.
Well, it's clear that those two have no answers to the homelessness issue. And I have actually spent 10 years working and volunteering in the downtown Eastside. So I just wanted to share with you all, that's how I became a foster parent, because I realized you can't affect change unless you bring people home. So I fostered 7 children in my home. One of them actually died of an overdose on the downtown Eastside. So this is an issue that's extremely personal to me. I sat on the board of the YWCA, and we built Crabtree Corner, and these are practical solutions to what we need to do to get people off the streets. We need to press Victoria to get treatment centers, get treatment programs. I particularly love the Portugal example that Daphne Bramham has. Who read that in the newspaper just recently? That was an excellent example of what I will do as the Mayor of Vancouver to work on this and take a lead on this homelessness
Candidates,
issue.
you have 2 minutes now.
That wasn't a solution. So the solution is no barrier housing, a lot of it, and now. Again, we have the wealth right here in this city, and we need to unlock that wealth and have a smart plan for the downtown East Side.
You say that to Portugal, but that's not a solution. I think Portugal absolutely thinks that that's a solution. And if you even read that article, and you knew that that was about,
that is not a solution. You know what,
that's one of the solutions that we need leadership on.
10 years ago, we had a mayor stand up and say he was going to fix homelessness. He was going to end homelessness. You're saying the same thing. You don't have a solution. So
Ken,
you know what?
I have been on the front lines of this issue for a long time. And let me tell you, there are communities in British Columbia, there are communities that are not very far from here that have effectively ended street homelessness. You know how they did it? They got away from the politics on it. They worked together and they built a lot of no barrier housing, and it's been done successfully over and over and over again. And we act like the world stops at Boundary Road, my friends.
I think
it
that's
works.
too
And
simplistic.
it's
No
not simplistic.
barrier housing is not going to be the solution.
Then you talk to Ottawa
it is
and you go on your trips.
multifaceted.
And
That's
it'll be
the
great. It'll be all
problem. You
solved.
don't understand. It is way deeper than that.
Housing
if it was
is
just
not-
that, we would have solved it already.
Well, because
No, my
it's
friend.
one issue.
When I was in the minister's office,
Exactly.
I watched in
Hector,
horror. I
the
watched in horror
issues
as our
in this
staff were trying
city
to
are
spend
not
$20
one
million.
issue.
30
As
seconds,
Ken
Kennedy.
says, they're not one issue.
fair
And
enough.
where's the NPA been on that, frankly, for 25 years?
Look,
this
real-
housing issue,
real
this
stories,
homelessness
$20 million
issue
trying to spend it in the
has
city
been
of Vancouver, they said no.
for
That's the
decades, and
history
it
of
is
this.
really time for us to look
It's shameful.
at a diversity of in-depth solutions like the Portugal model, because it's about treatment, it's multifaceted, it's about bringing people home. It's about not accepting the fact that people are going to die on the streets.
That's what
of
no
our
barrier
city.
housing is.
That
We're
is
literally saying
not
the same
acceptable
thing.
to
Thank you,
me.
candidates.
And as mayor, we will be addressing this
Thank you.
issue and working very hard on it.
All done. Who's up next?
We now have the first of our one-on-one questions. Mr. Harding, you are first.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Harding, let's talk about public street disorder in the downtown east side. 3 successive mayors, Larry Campbell, Sam Sullivan, and Gregor Robertson, have all made attempts to reduce homelessness, the open drug market, and the chronic mayhem in the community. Still, the public disorder persists. What is your plan to bring some order to the downtown east side?
Thank you.
60 seconds.
Great question. I have experience in this. I'm the only candidate who has experience firsthand in policing and dealing with this actual type of thing in public order. I dealt with this in London. We have to start with getting rid of the crime market. The crime market must go. We have to take back the streets from people who are lawless. We have to let people recognize, we have to bring in some common sense policies and some common sense policing. People who are down there threatening people need to be taken off the streets. But there are other issues. A lot of the lawlessness deals with mental health issues, drug issues. We have to tackle the mental health and the crisis in mental health. We have a myriad of crises, mental health and opioid and fentanyl addiction. I have a plan to deal with the fentanyl and the opioid addiction. I don't have time to go into in 10 seconds, but there will be a bigger police presence. We'll give the police the resources that they need to tackle the issues that are down there.
Thank you very much.
They have not been supported by City Hall.
Mr. Stewart, you are next for the one-on-one question.
Thanks.
Mr. Stewart, you have a plan to make Vancouver more affordable, but critics of yours have accused you of doing nothing to stop rental apartments from being demolished in your former riding of Burnaby, or standing up for renters' rights. How do you respond to that?
Right, well, thanks for the
60
opportunity to answer this question. Well, I think for me, just the clear way to put this is this been a smear campaign. There is a columnist for the Vancouver Courier who's a failed MPA candidate who has started this campaign to say that I have somehow failed the people of Burnaby. Now, I'd just like to set the facts straight here. I was elected in Burnaby with Jack Layton in 2011 in North Burnaby. So that's nowhere near Metrotown, or it is near, but Metrotown is not in the riding. And so what I did is when I talked to my constituents as a new MP, I asked them what their top issue was, and they said it was Kinder Morgan. And so I worked my guts out to stop that pipeline because that's what my constituents wanted. And so what happened in 2015 is the boundaries were changed. So then I moved to South Burnaby, and then I immediately got to work and saved hundreds of co-op units, hundreds of them. And I've got letters on my desk thanking me for that. So I feel fine about my record, but who feels the best about it are my constituents who thank me for the work I've done. Thank you.
Mr. Chen.
Mr. Chen, if elected, what 3 priorities will you implement in your first 90 days in office, keeping in mind that you won't have a majority even if all of your pro-Vancouver candidates do get elected?
It's a very good question. So the first thing that's common amongst all the groups is there's a concern about the budget, the finances. So I want to start a forensic audit of the books, not just a regular audit. We need to go deep, find out what's been happening, where the money's been going. Number 2, we got a housing crisis. So we need to move right away And one of the things that we realized, we've got on our team a builder. We don't have capacity, and we don't have time on our side. So we've looked at using temporary modular housing for not only marginalized families, but also for those that are in the middle class that are finding housing problems as a stopgap measure. We can combine the units to make much larger housing. And number 3, we've got to bring back small businesses and the strength in the community.
15 seconds.
Our businesses are leaving. Our people are leaving. They need our help. So we're going to look at altering the commercial property tax to give small businesses a hand to stay alive, to maintain their diversity, keep paying people, and keep the economy working. Thank you.
And thank you, Niamh and Mike. I want to introduce now Haley Wooden and Tyler Orton from Business in Vancouver. They're here for the next 4 rounds. That was a fairly modest round of applause for them, I thought. It all started with Hector. Anyway, round 5 now features Mr. Boudet, Ms. Sylvester, and Mr. Stewart. Question is for Mr. Boudet.
U.S. corporate tax cuts have hurt Greater Vancouver's tax competitiveness. We rank last among 17 comparable regions around the world, according to research from the Conference Board of Canada and Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. This hurts Greater Vancouver's ability to attract and retain large companies. If elected Mayor of Vancouver, Mr. Boudet, what specific measures would you take to make Vancouver more attractive to large employers?
You have 2 minutes, Mr. Boudet.
Well, I'd like a very limited system when it comes to permits, for instance. I would have like a permit system where you can go in, get a blank slate permit for whatever you want to do. You can innovate and do whatever you do. Some of the best ideas happen in garages. They didn't happen in offices. I would cost $25 for the paper and printouts and stuff like that. And then, work like a contract, right? They agree to put out 2% to the city on every sale, and they do what they want with it. And if they fail, they fail. So they have to agree not to take any corporate welfare. They all have to agree not to take a bailouts or any grants from the government in order to do it. And we can also, that would be a good source of revenue if the idea works out. And I think we should also cut a lot of useless spending in the City Hall, and we should also eliminate taxes as much as possible.
Ms. Sylvester, you have 1 minute.
So we have an issue in the city. We actually are doing fairly well economically. We're leading the country, one of the top cities, us and Toronto leading the country economically. We've got last year record growth, but we do have some issues, some tools in our toolkit that we can use as a city. We need an innovation strategy. We now have an innovation supercluster forming in this city. How can we as the city use the tools in our toolbox to support that innovation cluster? How can we support young entrepreneurs? That's a critical piece. We've got to look at all of the things in terms of zoning. Can we create a health and innovation and lifestyle zone between Cannabis Street and Granville Street so that we're protecting our health precinct? Is that possible to do? Those are the kinds of conversations I'm having right
15
now
seconds.
in terms of looking at how we support business continuing to thrive in our city. Because I actually think we're not doing too badly on that front.
Thank you. Mr. Stewart, 1 minute.
Great. Well, we're in the middle of a global economic storm. We've got inflation that's going up at the same time that interest rates are going up, and then we have very precarious negotiations with our most important trading partner. So we have to be ready for economic shocks. Now, I was elected in 2011, right after the global recession, and I know what happens in Ottawa is that Ottawa doesn't pay attention to British Columbia unless we make a lot of noise. And so after 7 years in Parliament, I know how to make a lot of noise, and I know how to go and get stuff for the city. And that's what I want to do. I want to protect the city that I love, The number one thing we can do for business is sort out the housing for the folks that work for business. And what we have to do is through affordable rental housing that's run by nonprofits, we also have to make sure that we get rental housing, and I've got a plan for that. So the idea, they're all connected. That when you talk to business, what they're saying is, I can't find workers. I can't find people to cook or to serve or to work in the hospital, and it's all due to housing. So unless we fix that,
Thank you, Mr.
we're in big
Stewart.
trouble.
Candidates, you have 2 minutes.
So I think I want to actually acknowledge that Kennedy's got it right in the sense that we've got to come up with housing. We also have to deal with transportation and transit, get very strong transit into our city so that people can move around in this city. I think that there's a number of other things that we can do to corporations in terms of talking about what they're doing around wages. We've become a place where immigrants can come, if they're flowed through to the US, they can come, there's a safe haven here for immigrants. And so that's a way in which new corporations are coming to Vancouver because they can set up a place that makes it easier for their workforces to come into Canada as immigrants, trained workforces, where they can't in the States because of laws that Trump has put in place. So I think that there's a number of things that we can do to create a place for companies. I'm particularly interested in the growth in the creative economy, the green economy, the digital economy. There's been considerable growth in that area.
Can I just jump in? Yeah, so what I'm really worried about is that we hit another recession in the fall. And we're going to have a new mayor and council on November 5th, and we need people there that know what they're doing. And we need people to be able to go to Ottawa and to walk in and talk to ministers and get the help that we need. We need people that can go to Victoria, that can talk to that provincial government, because the city can't do it on its own. And I know how to do that. I've been doing it for 7 years. I've been sitting on parliamentary committees. I've been getting legislation
So Kennedy,
passed.
7 years isn't enough, and you're a partisan. You're NDP.
30
How
seconds.
easy is that to do when you've got a Liberal government in power? Are they
Very
going to
easy.
pick up the
They
phone?
vote for my bills
I've
already.
been doing it
We've
for
got
30
to
years.
go back to the individual. We've got to trust the individual. When the government doesn't trust the individual, why should they trust us? Or if we are us. There's no reason why the government should be trusted, because it doesn't trust the individual. And we're all individuals. We're not all parties. We're not all slates. We're not all slaves to some
Thank you,
machine.
candidate. The next round is for Mr. Harding and Mr. Chen. Question is for Mr. Harding.
Dozens of illegal cannabis dispensaries currently operate in Vancouver in direct violation of municipal and federal laws. The legalization of recreational marijuana does not make these businesses legal. They will still need to meet strict licensing and regulatory requirements. While federal and provincial legislation outline the rules for this new industry, it will largely be up to municipalities to enforce those rules. If elected as mayor, Mr. Harding, would you shut down the dispensaries that break the law, or would you allow them to continue to operate as they do today?
Okay, great question. We need some common sense around dispensaries. In 2015, there were approximately 150 dispensaries seeking licenses from the city. Today, I believe there are 19 dispensaries, and in fact, today they just ended the Supreme Court action against the city. Talk without action is air. I've already engaged a lawyer to be the a special advisor to the Office of Mayor. This lawyer, Mr. Robert Laurie, as many people would know, is engaged in the cannabis dispensary as a legal expert. He travels the world giving advice on how to tackle, how to regulate, how to deal with dispensaries. We need the world-leading advice in City Hall in how to deal with this, because it's a complex issue. It covers 3 levels of government. There are people on one side of the aisle who despise cannabis dispensaries. There are people who think it's 60 years too late. My plan is to make sure that we're getting the best advice. The regulation for those that come in will actually be sorted out through the natural realms of the market. Dispensaries that become legal will still have to comply with the issues of insurance in their business. Some insurance companies won't allow them to be. They'll close down. They won't be able to stay in business. My plan is to get a world-leading advice to make sure that we've got the best advice to move forward and regulate them properly.
Mr. Chen, 1 minute.
So the problem is that when you want enforcement, you have to follow the law. If you have wiggle room and you don't enforce it, nobody respects anybody. Nobody respects the authority. The reason why you're electing us is to create the rules, to enforce the rules, and to make sure that everybody can live together in a strong community. If the laws say that they're not permitted, if they're not licensed, they got to go. Number two, what we need to do is push the provincial government to give the city the right to turn fines into tax lienable fines. Currently, the city has no real ability other than to go to collection to try and get fines out of you. That's why we have this problem with Airbnb. People are breaking the law. We've seen it.
15 seconds.
Rohan on our team has done this, and he's found bad licenses, and the city's done nothing because it can't. We have to take a strong stance if we're going to fix this problem.
Candidates, you have 2 more minutes. It's a debate.
Okay. I'll say this, is that the city, by not regulating these businesses, the city, by ignoring these businesses when they're looking for licenses, has created a morass. We've got a huge problem. The administration that comes in has to deal with the problem that this current administration has left for us. You're absolutely right. There are businesses that need to be closed down. If you don't get a license, you must close. That's going to be the position of my administration.
And I think it needs to be said as well that looking at the licenses also is related to where the source is. Part of the problem, and I've talked to users, we have bad pot coming into the system. We have pot that's coming from criminal sources. This is a concern. I've asked users, how do you feel if you're using pot that came from a group that might have done some really bad things to people? And they said they don't want that. So what we need is the regulation, not only in licensing the business, but making sure we know where it's coming from. I've communicated with a company called Nomis, and they are becoming a federally approved grower, and we want to maintain a clean pipeline and a clean operation of all of the pots.
All of this will be resolved when you've got regulation, and whether we like it or not, it is going to be legal in about 4 weeks' time. The crime should be getting pushed out by the market. Of course, crime will stay into the market. This is a very lucrative industry.
30 seconds.
With good regulation, great policies, we should be able to manage this as a city like we manage any other business.
The problem is you need a day one plan. The funny thing about profiteers and crooks, they're always a step ahead of you, and if you come into the game not thinking with a plan, they're already miles ahead of you. So that's why I'm saying we have regulation. We know that we have to have the stuff coming from regulated, approved grow operations, and we need to make sure that this whole thing stays clean.
Thank you, candidates.
Thank you.
Round 7 features Mr. Bremner and Ms. Sylvester. Question is again for Mr. Bremner, but because he was asked a question first earlier, his answer will be 60 seconds.
Yeah, thank you.
The Mobility Pricing Independent Commission presented its final report to the Mayor's Council last spring. Mr. Bremner, prior to that, you had expressed skepticism over mobility pricing. I'm wondering now, as Mayor, would you ever champion any of the main recommendations coming from the report in an effort to address congestion, both in the city as well as the region? I'd like to hear from both candidates their ideas to address congestion throughout the city of Vancouver.
Yeah, not so much skeptical. I don't know if you can hear me. Not so much skeptical of the concept of congestion pricing. I think it has worked successfely in some jurisdictions. I think I was skeptical as to whether or not the government actually would have the, wherewithal to bring it in. I think it seems pretty clearly from some of the briefings that I've been in on this that I doubt the public is going to stomach it and that the provincial government is really going to want to bring this forward. But that's for another level of government to discuss. But I think that the best way to reduce congestion is that we need to implement a citywide plan. And we need to implement it in such a way that we can make our communities more walkable, more bikeable, more transit friendly. But so long as 76% of our city is single family detached home, and so long as our city is built on this 1927 plan, really transit infrastructure, cycling infrastructure, active mobility infrastructure, it really becomes what has agitated people about things like bike lanes and things of this nature. It hasn't been a part of a holistic plan. It hasn't been, it's been a tactic rather than an overall strategy. And so that's where I feel that we can make neighborhoods less car reliant and we can make them more sustainable for families.
Ms. Sylvester?
So for 5 years, I led something called Moving in a Livable Region, which was a consortium of all the major transportation players. One of the things we did with TransLink is they started to talk about mobility pricing, and we said, before you go there, let's go talk to citizens. And let's have a really strong deliberative dialogue where we bring the best thinking from around the world. And let's see where citizens go. Let's see what citizens think are the values and the trade-offs. And one of the fascinating things that came out of that discussion, and we were in Surrey and Langley and Abbotsford, Fort Langley, we were here in Vancouver, is that citizens felt that the most important thing was fairness. That they wanted to know that the money was actually going to go to addressing congestion, and particularly go to transit. And one of the most interesting things that they felt distance-based pricing was one of the fairest options. One of my problems is we're not going enough and having these very educated, consultative conversations, because I actually think when you put it in the round, you're going to get good responses.
Candidates, you have 2 minutes.
Well, please, go ahead. Take a minute.
Sure, I can go on transportation.
Yeah.
So we've got a transportation plan, and I think that the Mayor's Council worked really hard to develop a transportation plan. It's called Transportation 2040. One of the things in that plan is the Broadway corridor. One of the things that I want to see, and I know others do, is we are going to extend that Broadway corridor in phase 1 to UBC. And that's as much an economic decision and connecting a really important part of our population as it is trying not to create a chokehold in our Arbutus. We also have to look at the whole gamut of transportation. Transportation doesn't just include cars, it includes active transportation. It includes looking at our seniors. They need places with scooters, wider pedestrian areas. We need cycle infrastructure. We need those things that enable shifts in modes. How do we get people to think about different ways? How do we look at car sharing? So what we need to do is really prioritize transportation, start to take more of a regional approach.
I'm so sorry to interrupt.
Sure,
I hate to interrupt, but I mean, you get fired up. I get fired up about things too. That's really great. Well, listen, we do agree on this point, and that the train does need to get to UBC. We need to get it faster than the Never Never plan that's there. But of course, it's our city plan, it's our comprehensive action plan that's going to get us there. Because unless we are unlocking the untapped wealth that's in our dirt right now, unless we take a holistic approach, unless we start to tie transportation to urban planning, and we get away from this conversation.
But Hector,
if you
in
just
your
permit,
plan, you've got like 44 pages and so little on transportation.
Because this is the housing plan. That's what the housing plan is about.
Exactly, it's a housing plan, not a transportation plan.
Why don't we really talk about how the fact that the mayor of Vancouver has to be a leader in the region again. And the reality is that Vancouver needs to be at the table, and instead of using our charter like an anchor around our neck, we need to be demonstrating real leadership and showing other cities the way. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have a regional plan that Vancouver's going to be leading, and we're going to make sure that we're showing people a better way, a comprehensive way, and a real plan. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Round 8 involves Mr. Stewart, Mr. Chen, and Ms. Young. Question is for Mr. Stewart.
1 minute on this one?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay.
Mr. Stewart, fair to say your opposition to the Trans Mountain Pipeline, it's been well documented. How would you go about allaying concerns from, say, large corporations that should you become mayor, it would signal perhaps Vancouver is ready to push back hard against other large infrastructure projects affecting the city and the region? And for the rest of the candidates, what do you believe the role of the city is with regards to courting large projects that could have negative environmental impacts?
So 2 minutes?
Yes.
To talk about Kinder Morgan? Oh, great. Okay. So when I was elected in 2011, the day after I was elected, the president of Kinder Morgan contacted me, Ian Anderson, and I had 4 meetings with Mr. Anderson. And I heard the plan, and it was pretty new, so what I did is went to my constituents, and I phoned every household, and I told them what the plan was, and I had them vote. And 75% of them, 5,000 voted, said they didn't want Kinder Morgan. So I, as an MP, stood up for them. I made 100 speeches in the House of Commons. I went to protests and so on, and and I think because I think it's very bad for the region. However, during that same time, I was able to win votes in the House of Commons. People that perhaps like Wei, who was in the House of Commons with me, that wouldn't have agreed with me on the House of Commons, for For example, I brought electronic petitioning to Canada by having a united vote. Everybody in the House of Commons eventually voted for the legislation I put forward. So they could scream at me in the House of Commons about Kinder Morgan, but the next day they would vote for my good ideas. So what I'm going to tell business is I know how to get things done. I can stand up for my constituents. I can be tough. I can fight for my constituents here, or I can fight for the city, is why I'm here. It's to fight for the city because it needs to be fought for. However, at the same time, I don't make it personal. I fight on policy issues, but then I can also make friends on policy issues. And I think business should be really assured. I've been talking with them all summer. I've been meeting with large, medium, small business. And what I'm hearing is this. I have a coffee shop. I lost 2 employees today. I offered them $5 more an hour. They still left because they can't find housing. So what's going to assure business is if we have a solid plan for housing that's going to be able to house people that work here. If you're good enough to work here, you should be good enough to live here. And that's the big problem with the city. Everybody knows it. And I'm going to help business sort that out. Thank you.
Ms. Young?
Actually, Vancouver doesn't have a housing issue. We have an affordability issue. There's 40,000 units that are coming on stream this year that were started last year. Our population is only 1% growth. We have enough housing, but we don't have affordable housing. And none of the solutions that the people earlier on had said addresses the affordability issue. They're just talking about the vote tomorrow and increasing supply, We've seen increased supply in the city. We've seen that it's made Vancouver more unaffordable because the more you build, they're all luxury townhouses, and it has made our city unaffordable.
15
exactly.
seconds.
So what we really need to be focusing on is how do we make Vancouver affordable again for those people that are being pushed out. Under Coalition Vancouver government, we will not sell any more city land, not 1 square inch. This will be our land.
Thank you.
Our land for
Mr.
our people.
Chen?
So I thought this question was about infrastructure projects and whether or not they would be environmentally sustainable and what would we do. What's that got to do with housing? So first thing I would say is that Pro Vancouver has one of the pillars of our philosophy is sustainability. And it comes with 4 subcomponents. One is cultural, another social, then we have economic, and we have environmental. I can tell you, in looking at all the things out there, if you unbalance those, you will create problems. Look at the bike lanes. Don't get me wrong, I'm a biker, I like bike lanes, but we've pushed so far and we spent so much, and what have we accomplished? We've created gridlock. That gridlock has created more exhaust problems. So when we look at the transit expansion, here's a perfect example. We have concerns about cost. It's a massive infrastructure thing.
10 seconds.
There are concerns about environmental, but to stop at Arbutus makes no sense. It has to go all the way to UBC. We have to balance all these things together to get what we need.
Thank you, Mr. Chen. Candidates, you have 2 minutes.
Sustainability is about how we live together. That's sustainability. And as we said earlier, because I didn't have a chance to talk about the housing question, so I wanted to share that with you all. The issue here is that how do we come together as a community to plan for these things? And that is what has not happened in the last decades of NPA and Vision Rule. They have dictated to neighborhoods as to what's going to happen. People have woken up in the morning and all of a sudden there's a 52-story building that's going up next to them. This is not sustainable, and that is exactly what's been happening.
I'm so glad Way's here. It kind of reminds me of being in Parliament. We would have civil debate, but be on the opposite side of the issues. And what's really important why you're in this race is because you have experience. You've been in the House of Commons for 4 years. You know what it's like. We've sat on opposite sides of committees. I think the Justice Committee we might have sat on for a while together. And I think that's key. Is we need folks in this race, and then eventually in City Hall, that have experience to do this. So on November 5th, you're going to have a new mayor and council. They're going to inherit a $1.5 billion budget. They're going to inherit the opioid crisis and the housing crisis and international economics crisis, and you don't need somebody that doesn't have any experience there, to put it properly.
Problem is, both of those answers still don't answer your question. What happens when you're asking about infrastructure and whether or not
30
it's
seconds.
environmentally sustainable. And that is what we're talking about with policies that are balanced to make sure that that infrastructure, not housing, housing is not necessarily
And we do
infrastructure.
have balanced
We need
policies.
to make sure
Absolutely, we
that that
do.
stuff is in place to sustain the growing population, and it is balanced, it meets the needs, it meets the economic targets so that it's affordable, so you don't get squeezed to death with taxes that you were not asking for.
Thank you, candidate. It's on time. Into our directed questions now, Mr. Boudet.
Mr. Boudet, commercial property values, they've been exploding across Vancouver, and with it, business owners are facing tax burdens that have sent many of them retreating from the city. How can the city work with stakeholders to address these mounting tax burdens and the growing scarcity of commercial land here in Vancouver?
60 seconds.
Well, the whole issue is the taxes are too high, and let's just fund a government that's a little too large. And if you look at the cost of land and property, it's also gone up with the government that's gone larger over time. And this isn't new. It's been happening since '96, probably even before that. Ever since I lived here, I've noticed the rents going up. But I had to move from the West End because of that. And that was way before now. I mean, it's amazing that no one could actually see this. HMV went out of business on Robson, what was that, the 90s?
15 seconds.
No one saw this coming? I mean, they couldn't just decide to start dropping taxes, looking at places to cut, maybe find a new way of funding things without doing it?
Thank you, Mr. Boudet.
Thanks.
Ms. Sylvester?
Ms. Sylvester, Vancouver's permitting process, as you know, has complicated the city's affordability issues. A permitting backlog has slowed housing supply, and delays have contributed to housing costs. There is a lack of transparency as well around parts of the process, such as community amenity contributions. If elected, Ms. Sylvester, what specific measures would you take to improve permitting in Vancouver?
Thank you. I want to say that's an easy one. That's a giveaway, because it's already in my housing platform. We have a serious problem with permitting. There's a lack of transparency, and as a result, a real lack of trust, I think. So we've got to look at permitting and looking at how we fast track. Let's get a sense of what the permits and the policies that we have that are overlapping. We've got a lot of overlapping policies. We need to clarify those, and we need to get them simpler so that when people are coming in to develop a project, they have a true sense of what they're up against. It's not the snakes and ladders through City Hall. So we need to reduce permitting times. Then let's also look at how we can use the permitting process to incentivize things we want, like affordable, purpose-built rental. So let's create the situation where we fast track purpose-built affordable rental through the permitting process, and let's also bring a transparency to the community amenity contributions. That's a real problem. I need to look at our budget because we've gone way over in terms of our dependence on community amenity agreements.
Thank you, Haley and Tyler. And I want to introduce now Lindsay William-Ross and Rob Kronbauer from Vancouver's Awesome. Round 9 features Mr. Harding, Mr. Sim, and Mr. Boudet. The question is for Mr. Harding. You will have 2 minutes to respond.
We heard a little bit earlier about corporations, but I want to talk a little bit about a smaller business enterprise that's quite popular in Vancouver. We could be a global culinary city. We certainly have the talent here, but high rents and staffing issues prevent new restaurants with incredible talent from getting off the ground here. How can we attract the talent for all the positions in restaurants and come into our own as the culinary destination that we really should be?
Mr. Harding, you have 2 minutes.
Okay, I probably won't need 2 minutes on this. We have to make the city create an environment of certainty and stability where every business can thrive. We have to make sure that people can afford to be here. I don't know if it's an issue, I would say it's not an issue of whether it's a restaurant or a shop, but people can't afford to be here. We want to reduce transit for people we want to eliminate the cost, the fare on transit for people who are 18 and under. right? That's really important to get young people into these jobs. I spoke to a restaurateur who has salaries at $20 an hour. He can't find anybody to fill those positions. We're losing restaurants and businesses all the time. So we need to create an environment where we can find some method of actually enhancing salaries. Now, I want to say this. In the same vein, many years ago, I found somebody a job who was a landscape gardener, and it was a worker on the downtown east side. And I actually found a company that was prepared to bring her on if we could get some kind of subsidence for her salary. We have to look at this for some of these businesses. When I worked in London, there was a subsidence called London Waiting. Businesses, and every business in London, your salary is topped up by the government. Now, I'm not suggesting it gets topped up by the municipal hall, not at all. But we have to find some way to bring in and retain top talent for every industry and every business.
Mr. Sims, 60 seconds.
So I am a restaurant owner, and yeah, we have significant issues, and we are one of those employers that actually pays well above market. We actually offer benefits as well, and we are on decent transit. We're right at Main and Broadway, so this is a big issue that we're all dealing with, and it comes down to, once again, you know, we love transit and it has to work, but it comes down to affordable housing. And that's how we built part of our platform. I know it's not the only thing, but you know, when we have secondary suites throughout the city, people can actually afford to live near where they work. And when we have the secondary suites, it puts downward pressure on rents, on condos and townhomes as well.
15 seconds.
That's it.
Mr. Boudet.
I don't think transit's going to help people stay near their workplace. Really, the rapid transit thing is really just so old money can make sure their dinner is served and they can send everyone, all the riffraff, out of town. It would be a nice thing if it just stopped, and if the municipalities actually handled their own transit, and it stopped at some point, and then they had to get off and then cross the border to the next town, then take that transit trip. Because at least they would just slow down, be a little less convenient. They get rid of the West Coast Express, you know. Then they'd probably have to start renting people houses here because they won't get their service in this neighborhood.
15 seconds. Candidates, you have 2 minutes.
Well, one thing, like I think we all agree on a lot of these issues here. One thing we actually can do to support not just our restaurants, but all of our commercial businesses is we need to actually go to BC assessment and work with them to figure out how they're assessing our property taxes on our businesses. The ratio's out of whack, and it's actually gutting our city. Property taxes are going through the roof because, you know, if you're in a restaurant, a one-story building, and a condo tower goes up near, down the street, that building is now assessed as a condo tower, and the property taxes go through the roof, and it puts the businesses out of business. And you're seeing it now. You're seeing it on Davie, Denman, in Kitts, Westforth, the list goes on and on. We all know that. And so what I'm committed to doing is we are going to go to BC assessment and we are going to fight this, or there's going to be a gutting of our entire city.
Our platform calls for a small business ombudsman. We need a small business ombudsman, someone who can help all of these businesses deal with the escalating, out of control leases, somebody that they need to go to. Someone that they can go to and actually bring these down and bring them back into line. I agree with Ken.
Why doesn't the mayor just be like the ombudsman? Yeah. Why doesn't the mayor lead and go around?
That's actually a great question.
And this is an important factor when it comes to business. Government doesn't need to support. It needs to get out of the way. It's intervening, it's meddlesome, and it's overtaxing, and it has to get out of the way.
Yeah. And that's great, actually.
As far as London goes, we're already following the bad ideas of London, like CCTV cameras. Eventually, we're going to be arresting people for shooting their dog on Twitter.
There's still time in this round.
Well,
I can't follow that.
Well, you know what? I think you're right. You know, government should get out of the way. Now, the thing is, I'm actually a small businessman.
Okay, there's no longer time in this round. Round 10 is Ms. Sylvester, Mr. Harding, and Ms. Young. Question is for Ms. Sylvester.
So we have a lot of really great and some not so great public art in our city. I'd like to know what each of your favorite pieces are individually, and then also how you think public art should be funded.
The beauty of the art is in the eye of the beholder, so I'm not going to pass judgment on public art. But what I am going to say is arts and the art community in this city is absolutely fundamental to the vibrancy of our city. It's one of the things that I did when I was at the SFU Public Squares, we looked at isolation in the urban environment. And we also looked at how we did something called We the City, which is how do we create a sense of ourselves in the city? And the arts community is such a critical part of that. There are many public art pieces I love. I love the bird, the oversized bird in Cole Harbour. I love the pillar that is a Douglas tree that you look at in one of the major towers. There are so many pieces of artwork that keep me thinking. I love the Biennale work that's gone on in this city, whether it's the smiling folks in English Bay, or if it's the stacked cars on top of the tree as you come off the viaducts. So public art is something that is accessible. It's something that says we are a city that has meaning, that has a sense of belonging. I studied as an anthropologist, and one of the things that you do is you study culture. And it's such an important part of how we identify with each other. And one of the things I would like to see more of is I would like to see our immigrant communities, our communities that have been here for 2, 3, 4, 5 generations, and our Indigenous communities having a bigger role in the public art of this community. We don't see enough of that. I think of that beautiful, beautiful piece that Michael Nicol-Yagalatis, I'm saying his last name wrong, up at 33rd and Knight. Just a beautiful piece. We need more of that.
Mr. Harding.
We need far more of it.
I agree. I really like the smiling faces on English Bay. I really don't like the stacked cars, but beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? And people come and they visit Vancouver. I drive by there. They always like, what is that? Right? But we have to fund this through private funding. I don't believe the money should come from the City Hall, that's for sure. And I also don't think it should be coming from the CACs that are applied. In New Zealand, in Wellington, they actually have people who do raise money privately. It goes into the airport, it goes into the public spaces. It's all private money. I don't see any other way to do it. That's a common sense approach.
Ms. Young?
Many people in this audience do not know, but my daughter is actually an artist. She's been an artist since she was 3, and she's been juried and shown. So it's been a real joy to have her in my life, because as she's studying art in the Ontario College of Art and Design, I am also studying art alongside with her. I want to say that this city does not have enough public art. For example, where is our new art gallery? Recently, just last week, I met with the art gallery folks who shared with me their plan for the new art gallery. It is an impressive plan where we can have big spaces for public art and etc. I am a huge proponent of public art, and the fact that the arts and culture professionals and amateurs in this city are phenomenal. We need to celebrate them. We need to give them spaces. We need to give them support. I do not agree with Mr. Harding that there is no place for the city in public art. I believe that we can leverage and have leadership as the mayor, and I will certainly do that.
Candidates, you have 2 minutes.
So I am going to disagree respectfully, Fred, that actually there's an economic dimension to arts in our community. This is one of the most vibrant economic communities in our city. There's been study after study of Vancouver. We have clusters here of artists, innovators, entrepreneurs, and what they need, and when I was sat on the board of Van City, we tried to provide it, live work studios. But what's happened is these strata councils don't like the smell of the artist's materials, don't like the sound of the drummer working, and so we've lost so many of our live work studios Because Strata
This is why we
this is an
need
issue.
the new art gallery complex, because it will have studios for our artists, it will have classrooms for the people that are still learning. It is go online, find out what they're doing. It is phenomenal. The issue is,
Shauna,
in this city, we have not had any leadership in our arts and cultural community, and that is the issue. So the mayor has to be the leader in the arts and cultural community, and to bring different levels of government and leverage the investment that we should have, because this is a huge sector in Vancouver.
Should it be publicly funded, or should it be coming out of municipal
Fred,
hall?
it's not all or nothing, but yes, yes, we have a role as cities. In fact, we were the only city that didn't cut our artists' funding when the federal and provincial government cut it. We held it strong, but it's not nearly enough.
I'm not suggesting we cut art. I'm not suggesting we cut art.
We work with the
fully
foundations.
support art, but when you go to places like Manchester, they have a massive art exhibition throughout the whole of Manchester. It's big, it's huge, but it's publicly funded.
Good, it's publicly funded.
Forgive me.
So then we've got to go to...
It's privately funded. My mistake. It's privately funded. They bring in investment to put the art pieces onto the street. It's not coming out of the taxpayer's pocket.
I think that there's a lot of things that
Thank you,
we
candidates.
do. Okay.
This round 11, is for Mr. Chen, Mr. Boudet, and Mr. Bremner. Mr. Chen is going to get the question. Can't use these microphones.
Figured it out.
Okay.
One issue in the 2011 election was to reestablish an urban streetcar line. Lately, there has been a lot of talk about permanently activating the Olympic streetcar line as not just a tourist attraction, but a viable transit option. Do you support this or any other streetcar line? And if so, who would you like to see run it?
It's a fantastic question. I have to give you an option C. This is not that easy. It's not a binary answer. So the streetcar line that was going through Granville Island, that one's fine because it's not affected by traffic. But here's a problem when you're talking about LRT, especially in Vancouver. I've been to other cities in the world, and it's this weird chaos. It's a controlled chaos. We see two cars coming, they're about to hit, and then they veer off. They're playing chicken really well. Vancouver, you see two cars coming, bang. Now we're going to deal with ICBC. The problem with an LRT is you have a dedicated line in the ground, you get an impact with a vehicle, you are now dealing with 3 to 10 hours of accident investigation, and nothing else can get through behind that thing. So what I would say is I'm against streetcar lines. I would rather promote hydrogen fuel cell electric buses that don't have trolley lines. They can get around this problem. They have much higher efficiency. And at the end of the day, we may actually have to look at getting someone else other than TransLink. We're seeing a lot of problems where TransLink is not dealing with the problems in each municipality. I think we have to have much stronger say because each municipality is very different in the makeup of the people and the operation of that city. Thank you.
Mr. Boudet?
If it can be made to work, it's probably something to look at, but it should probably be should be handed to a private company to handle if it does end up being possibly even allow. I think it's a complicated situation. What you could possibly do is you can make the city the port authority, and then get a private company to offer their services to run the thing, but it probably would be better just to look at ride sharing and gypsy cabs and things like that, and just let them.
15 seconds.
People move around freely. It's a very limited type of travel, and this city is not quite that built for it. I mean, when Toronto had little trains,
Thank you, Mr. Boudet. Mr. Bremner.
Thank you. So we get this asked question a lot at City Hall, is LRT, a lot of different concepts. Some people even wanted to replace the Broadway SkyTrain line with that. And it's a concept that is romanticized by some, feared by others, and it's a debate that rages on. But I think really fundamentally what we have to talk about is that are our neighborhoods sustainable for public transit? Are we putting, Manchester was mentioned about art. Well, Manchester is an enormous city of multi-millions of people. Paris is the same size as Vancouver geographically, but it has 2.3 million people in it. So the economy of scale for the city of Vancouver is that we're a city for approximately 630,000 people. We punch above our weight. We do, but we need to innovate across the lines, and you know, things like LRT and SkyTrain and others, they're going to have to happen with a holistic plan where we are able to unlock, again, the untapped equity in our cities, build middle-class housing, workforce housing in and around these areas, create nucleus communities, make sure that we're upzoning for commercial space. We have a desperate need for more job space in this city. It's one of the biggest gaps that we have.
Thank you, Mr. Bremner. Candidates, you have 2 minutes.
So when we're talking about transport, I think one of the things, and Mr. Bremner talked about this, about the fiscal responsibility and a lot of these things, we have to remember the costing. You look at the SkyTrain system, that compared to LRT, LRT is 1/3 the cost. And if you deal with buses instead of LRT to maintain the same capacity as the LRT, it comes in at 20% of the SkyTrain cost. So if we're talking about viable and unlocking community equity and providing housing, spend your money wisely.
But
then you can move to housing.
hold on now. Now, London's subway and New York's subways were cut in the 1860s. Now, when you do a piece of transit infrastructure, and if we're going to be spending the money that you're talking about, if we're going to do LRT, it's kind of like the mistake that they're making near King Ed SkyTrain Station, where they're putting duplexes and row homes and townhouses right next to a SkyTrain station. That's not a 100-year plan. We need to really think about transit investment as a 100-year investment. In that scale of time,
but it's not just
real trains make sense. We have to think in scale here, guys. We have to think in scale.
Labor was a lot cheaper. We're talking about very different scenarios.
You're just tearing it out in a nearer term. So, my friend, what I'm trying to explain is that we really, at this level of government, it's not like the provincial level or federal level of government. We don't just fund programs, we build cities.
So you want to indebt 3 generations with this. That makes a lot of sense.
3 generations are going to use it, right? 3 generations are going to use it, and it's only going to get more expensive to do it later.
They're going to use it, but they're not going to be able to afford to live in Vancouver, which you said that you're trying to do, and you're going to do the opposite of that. That makes no sense.
I'm not sure what you're referring to. You lost me there.
LRT
but
isn't this...
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
She didn't even ask about LRT.
She said streetcar trains.
Streetcars, yeah, but that's not LRT. Light train rail is a different thing.
We'll have to leave that a mystery for now.
Let's do it. That was really good. That was really good. Thank you for that.
Mr. Stewart and Mr. Sim. Round 12 is for Mr. Stewart and Mr. Sim. Great.
That's hilarious.
Mr. Stewart's going to get the question, but because you've already had one question lobbed at you first, you get a 60-second response instead of a 2-minute.
Over the years, Vancouver has built up a reputation of being a hashtag no fun city. What makes Vancouver awesome in your opinion, and what would you do to boost the profile of our city?
Okay, well, I moved to Vancouver in 1989 with $100 that my grandmother gave me, and I was a musician. And so I came here, ran printing presses, drove beer trucks in order to play music, and got in. There was an awesome music scene here in the early 90s. So with the band I was in, State of Mind, we won Demolition Derby and did much music and CDs and videos and played all over the place, Commodore 50 times. This city was so vibrant. And why? Because I could live in a basement apartment and then invest in musical equipment. It is all hooked back to housing. It's all, I could not do what I did in the late 1980s. Now, there's no way some guy with no money from Nova Scotia can move here and then join a successful rock band. So what we have to do is fix the housing so people can spend more money on other stuff like cooking, like culture, like movies, like books, like literature. And it's that simple. All other cities have the same problem. They address it. We're not addressing it well enough here.
Mr. Sim, 1 minute.
Thank you for supporting our 2 secondary suite platform, by the way. That's great. No, look, we have a lot of things going on that we have planned. We are going to be talking about patios, outdoor events. We're working it into our platform right now, live music events. But the biggest thing we're going to do, we're actually going to save it to the close, but I'm going to announce it now. I think it's completely ridiculous how you cannot buy a beer or a bottle of BC wine in our corner stores. And as Mayor of Vancouver, we're going to make that happen.
still going?
Okay.
We'll make it happen.
You have 2 minutes.
Okay, well, so we heard a lot about the art gallery, which is a good thing, and that's for citizens to decide, but what we really need is local creative spaces for artists. We need, it's so expensive here for housing, so expensive for commercial space, so the city needs to do more investment in spaces for musicians. So my brother's a musician. He plays in a local street punk band called Bishop's Green. He travels all over Europe and plays the 10,000 person shows. He comes here, and there's nowhere to practice. And so this is a real shortage. If you talk to the arts community, I have tons of friends who are artists that I knew through my musical career. They're building public art. They all say the same thing. We don't need these huge programs and plans. What we need is very simple stuff, and that's where for artists to create. And the best thing is they share cultures. So we have like an Asian and indigenous fusion. That is unique, and we can export that. That is a way to generate business and money here, but also our stories get told internationally, and that's what will happen if we have just these simple local spaces.
Yeah, I think that's great. And one thing we're going to do as well is it goes back to the commercial property taxes. If we do not address that, we will actually have a gutting of our cities. We will not be able to have small venues where live bands can play or cool restaurants or patios because they will all leave and get redeveloped.
But would you invest in local spaces for artists? Would you use city money, city land to do that?
We would support it.
What does that mean? Would you actually put money into it? Because your plan is to cut services. If you read your platform, it's all about cutting services.
It's not about
shutting libraries, right?
What are you talking about?
Absolutely. Read through your plan. It's all about cutting taxes. Run the city like a business. That's what you say over and over again.
That's your business. If you actually understand business, if you run a successful business, you grow.
How many units of housing
wait a sec. I'm answering your question.
If you're a
so
mayor?
right now, we have over 5,000 employees, and we grow those employees. We invest in education.
That's your
and
business.
So,
what are you going to do as mayor?
So
what are you going to do as mayor?
So when we talk about efficiency and stuff, we will never ever let. No, hold on.
Tell us what you're going to do.
Stop heckling. Let me answer the question.
Well, I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to answer the question. We're out of time. We now have time for our last series of directed questions. Our first is to Ms. Young.
Ms. Young, we're going to bring it back to bike lanes for you a little bit. And we'd like you to clarify two things specifically for us that were not clarified earlier. One, why specifically are single mothers troubled by bike lanes? And secondly, we would like you to clarify if you have priced out the cost of removing the bike lanes.
60 seconds, Ms. Young.
Why about single mothers? Because I actually had twins. I don't know if people know this. And so for myself, to drop one of my children off at soccer and then to get them to their art class, and it was impossible for me to cycle there. It would be lovely, but impossible. And I think that on a practical, common sense level, people need to have free roads so that they can get to where they need to get to safely. And so that's number one. Number two, sorry, can you repeat your second question?
Have you worked out the math for the cost
Oh,
of
absolutely.
removing
We
bike
are
lanes?
not going to tear down the viaducts, the Georgia and Dunsmuir viaducts, which is a $4.5 billion cost, and we are not going to be doing that. In addition to that, what we know for a fact is that the City of Vancouver budgets have gone up to $1.4 billion. $1.4 billion. There are savings to be had there. We're going to be doing an audit on the city books. The mayor's office does not need 40 full-time communication staff, do not need 40 full-time staff in the transportation department. Thank you.
Mr. Bremner's next.
Mr. Bremner, your team seems to have been the most shrewd in using campaign funding laws to its advantage. With your face showing up on billboards and posters all over the town for weeks now, yet both you and your organization claim to have no idea who's behind it all, as if it's some grand mystery to you. Would you encourage the mystery people behind the ads to come forward and show the receipts, or would you rather they remain shrouded?
So, yeah.
So, the campaign finance laws, written by the NDP, supported by Vision, supported by Green, put in place. And, you know, if someone wants to come out and say it was them, I'd love to know about it as well. The reality is that they created this PAC system. And so our campaign did not ask for, did not collaborate with, and did not have any knowledge of this campaign. When it showed up, it was there. Listen, where were you when Tides Canada was pouring tons of money in here just a few years ago? Where were you? You didn't say anything. You said nothing. And you said nothing. And so where is all the district labor money
15
going?
seconds.
There has been AstroTurf campaign after AstroTurf campaign. It's supporting a new party, a new campaign, and it says, I'm best for mayor. But you know what? I was honored to have their support. If they want to come out and do it, then they will be, I have
Thank you,
not
Mr. Bremner.
engaged with them. They are free to come and tell you.
Thank you, Mr. Bremner.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Sim.
Mr. Sim, you didn't get the chance to answer something that Mr. Stewart was posing to you, so we'll essentially let you continue. You founded a number of successful business ventures, but you don't have experience in politics. We have seen an alarming example of this scenario playing out in the top job of the United States. How would you run City Hall differently than you run your business?
I would run it the exact same way. And so, hold on, let me answer your question. You can heckle after. And so, at the end of the day, I think the comparison between myself and someone in the States is, I'm in the business of keeping people at home. We take care of seniors, we promote happier aging, and we actually set up a foundation called the Dream On Foundation, which is effectively Make-A-Wish for seniors. And so that's where my heart is, that's who I am. As it comes to running City Hall, what people have to realize is we're a best employer, we know how to treat people. And in City Hall, we actually have phenomenal people, whereas you would actually say, I would be gutting City Hall. I would actually say, we are going to support our people. They're working in a broken system. My plan, as soon as we get into City Hall, is I'm actually going to spend the next 3 months walking around the city, talking to everyone that works. I'm going to be talking to the unions, the police force, the fire department, the people that work in the yards.
So we're actually running ahead of schedule, which is rare for any of us here. But we have now closing statements. We were going to permit only 1-minute statements, but I think we have time for 2-minute statements in the order that the candidates were drawn. Mr. Bremner, you will start.
Well, thank you again, Kirk, for your service as well in stepping up, hosting this, and also your past work in the community. And thank you all for coming out and engaging in this thoughtful debate and asking tough questions. And we were all, I think, pretty well behaved here tonight. I think we did a pretty good job, and I hope that we did our system proud, because that's really fundamentally what got me involved in this. At the end of the day, we're all angry about a lot of the same things. We're frustrated, and we're seeing something slip away from us. And politicians and the political process has probably given us more than enough reason to not want to get involved. Not enough people vote. Not enough people put their name on a ballot. Not enough people get out and try to make a difference in their community. But what I'm really proud of is that we've been able to create this new organization. And we've been able to boldly go out there and put 5 small business owners with me on a council slate to bring forward a real plan for the 21st century. Not hate and blame, not tax and ban, but a real hope for our future together and a plan to get there. So I hope that you'll at least do me that. Read our plan. Take a time, really look at it. Really consider what's been said. Really understand who and what and where people have come from in this race. It's so critical, because we are more than arguing about a pipeline or a bike lane or who's an NDP, who's a BC Liberal, all this stuff is just noise. We have got 9,000 less children enrolled in our schools. We've had a 30% increase in homelessness in the last 3 years. Seniors are told that they have to leave our community because we act as if a 4-story building anywhere near us is somehow the end of the world. Enough is enough. It's time to take all the good ideas. And you know what? Some of my colleagues up here, they do have some good ideas. But I'll tell you this. Last year, I knew that I needed to step and come out to City Council and do the job.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bremner.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Mr. Stewart, you are next.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out tonight and my opponents who have done a great job here, so thank you. I moved out to Vancouver from Nova Scotia in the late 80s with $100, and this city has given me absolutely everything. I mean, my education here at Simon Fraser University, and then on to the London School of Economics to get a PhD, and then having the great privilege of serving in Parliament for 7 years, dealing with some very, very tough issues, and learning how politics is done. I'm really worried about this city, and that's why I've stepped down. That's why I'm no longer an MP. That's why I quit that job in order to come here, because this city's given me everything. I love it, and I think it's in real trouble. All my work academically has been on cities and on housing. I've given housing advice all around the world, the United Nations, national governments. So I thought, well, if I can put all my expertise into other places, why can't I do it here? And the best role I can do this in is from the mayor's chair. So November 5th, we're going to have a very fractured council. It's a change election. You know, a long-term mayor steps down. It's a change election. So this is what change looks like. It's kind of messy and it's kind of exciting. But on November 5th, all that should settle down and we need to get right to work. And I have the experience to do that, but I also have the experience in bringing people together. Last year, I wrote a book with Michael Chong, you might be surprised, who is a Conservative MP that ran for the leadership race. Elizabeth May was in that book. Preston Manning was in that book. I've passed bills in Parliament. Some like the electronic petitions and also toughening driving impairment laws. So I've done this work and I know what to do when I get to City Hall. But I need a progressive council, and what I'm really hoping is that if you vote for me, you'll also consider candidates from one city. Jean Swanson, I went down to her court hearing the other day. I think she's a great beacon in this city. And I think there are some other great candidates in Vision too. So I would think that we need to have a progressive council that's going to look after the city and get the housing built that we need built here. Thank you.
Mr. Harding.
Thank you. I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight as well. Thank you so much. And I want to thank my, my opponents as well. They're good people on this stage with some great ideas. We need to return to common sense government. We must return to get some common sense into what's going on in this city. We've been failed. We've been failed miserably over the last 10 years. We have to do some good business here. We have to get our permits cut by 90%. We have to bring investment into the city. We can do that. We're going to bring back the NBA. We're going to make sure that they've got a stadium that they can play out of. Where? On the waterfront. We've got a lot of space here. Don't say where, let's say how, right? Let's make it happen. This is the problem. Because it's business. It is a billion-dollar business, and we need business. That's what we need. We need a great transport system. We need to get people who are 18 and under traveling for free so that we can, and seniors, so that we can get thousands of cars off the road. We have to have safety in our cities, in our city. People are feeling unsafe. They're afraid of leaving their homes. It's not just crime, but it's the fear of crime. And we have to work on reducing both. And we have to work on our housing issue. You have to remember, we want people to vote. Your vote is your voice. Your vote is your voice. Your vote is your voice, and if you don't use your vote, you lose your voice, and you must have a voice at City Hall. I want to be your mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sim.
Yeah. By the way, these candidates are great. We joked about it after. Actually, it's not a joke. We're actually going to grab beers at the end of the campaign together. Vancouver's at a crossroads. We all know that. And, you know, Mr. Kennedy, you mentioned that, you know what, you can work with people. Mr. Stewart, Kennedy. You say you can work with people because you're a bridge builder, but then you went and you said, please vote for these different groups. That's not inclusive, right? And so I've actually met most of the candidates from all the different parties, and I've reached out because I know as soon as I'm mayor, it's not going to be a mayor and 10 people on council, it's going to be 11 people that are equals. And so that's what I would suggest. That's the attitude we have to have. In addition to that, we've actually put together an amazing slate of candidates. And so when you actually look at the MPA's candidate, they're diverse. We actually have 5 women running for council versus 3 men. We have ethnic diversity, sexual orientation diversity, socioeconomic diversity. We have a bus driver running for parks. There is no left or right in our party. There's representation from every corner of this city. That's the team that we put together, people that care about the city, and they're going to put partisan behaviors at the door, and they're going to work for the city.
Thank you. Ms. Silvestre.
Thanks so much. I'm looking at this election, and I'm saying we're at this very important historical moment. And it's a historical moment that I would say is going to be characterized in 2 ways. Will we create a city where people feel like they can live, that their kids can live here, that you can age here? Will we create that city? That's how we're going to be judged. Because at the heart of this is, who is this city for? Is it going to be for us? Or is it going to be for others that don't live and work here anymore? And so for me, I entered into this race because I feel like this is the one time in our history where we need an independent voice that's experienced, deeply experienced in good governance and financial accountability, but more important, I have 30 years working in conflict zones across so many differences. Getting people together, getting them to work together, and in the service of the city of Vancouver and the people of Vancouver, not for their political party. So I am the only independent candidate that has that level of experience and does not have that political alignment. Because if we do have that political alignment, exactly what you heard Mr. Stewart say, you're going to start picking.
30 seconds.
And then you can't work. The other thing that I think is critical is we're divided and we're fragmented. And right now, 41% of the people of this region don't think democracy is the right way forward. It's part of my research, it's what I do, and it's the other reason I'm here. We have to turn the corner, or we can start looking at what's happened in Ontario, what's happened in the United States, happening here. We can turn this around. There is so much good about this city.
Thank you very much.
And so many great solutions. Thank you.
Mr. Chen.
First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for coming out here, because your time is actually the most precious commodity in the world. No matter how much money you have, you cannot buy more of. So thank you for coming out. 25 years of working in the community, I've learned a lot of things. I never did that because I wanted rewards, recognition. One of the things I learned to survive that is you have to listen. You have to know who's the boss. The funny thing in all of this, we know this is going to be fractured. Mr. Stewart is very correct. But the funny thing I keep hearing, thank you, acknowledge my opponents. They're not my opponents, they're my colleagues. Because if you're going to create unity, they're not opponents. They are part of your family. They are brothers and sisters. They just have a different opinion. And that's where you work together. I'm a homegrown kid. I'm a very simple person. But again, I don't really like to talk about myself, but you're here because you want to know who is going to be that leader you're going to trust. So, okay, here's a bit of my background. I grew up on the poor side of Point Grey. I know you laugh, but on the other side of the army camp, in the old days, we were all poor. We collected bottles, we used the deposit, go get a slush cat, play video games. I know that in my career, I'm a CFP, Certified Financial Planner, so I get the books. I also have a degree from McGill in human physiology, as well as a degree from UBC in biopsychology. I understand the social psychology aspect. I understand the business. I've been an entrepreneur mentor for 6 years. I've kept young entrepreneurs out of trouble, kept them in business. But here's something interesting about business and governance. There is a part that is business and governance, but there's another part. All of you are not the customer. You're actually the boss. And if you don't understand that, you don't deserve to lead. The leader needs to listen to you, every single one in this.
Thank you, Mr. Chow.
Thank you.
Ms. Young.
Again, I'd like to, is this working?
I hope so.
Is this working?
I think it is. No? There.
Oh, I think it's red now, yes. Is that better?
And your 2 minutes will start now. I'm being generous. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, fellow candidates, and I agree that we have ideas, and some of these ideas that are great ideas we're going to take. And thank you for being here today. We're here, and I'm running for mayor because Vancouver has lost its soul. Everywhere we go, there is people that are struggling to live in the city. Livability is an issue, as you know. Affordability is an issue. Businesses are closing in our neighborhoods. Our youth are fleeing because they can't afford to live here. My children may not be able to come back and live here. This is why I am running for mayor. We can do better. We can clean up our city. We can have mutual respect on our roads. We can decrease the taxes that are making it so unaffordable to live in the city. When City Hall is putting taxes on building in the city, where 56% of the building are taxes that go to the city, 107 taxes, there is something very wrong with City Hall. In this city, I've lived here for over 50 years, and so many of us have lived through the dictatorship that has happened in the last 10 years, where
30 seconds.
We wake up the next day and things have just happened. Coalition Vancouver was formed to be for the people, to be for the people that have been ignored, the businesses that have been ignored, that have closed up. We are for the people and not for big businesses, not for special interest groups, not for the unions that have been selling out our city beneath us. We are the only ones that are for the people and can
Thank you, Ms. Young.
provide. Thank you.
Mr. Boudet.
Hi. I'm a comedian. I'm also an artist, oddly enough. I didn't get asked that question. So I'll answer that now. I find it censorship, arts funding. When you can't fund every artist who comes and needs it, it's censorship, because it's the government picking and choosing what speech deserves it. And that's not right. And it's also a very safe place to cut, slash, and burn when you need to pay for other things that are more necessary, like fixing a road or something. I look forward to seeing a much freer city. I'm a free speech advocate. I think we need someone who is a free speech advocate to moderate council, because I mean, if anyone's going to give everyone a shot at saying something, it's going to be a libertarian. A libertarian is not going to say, no, you have no right to say that. Because he's full of shit if, if he does that. Pardon my French.
We just got kicked off Facebook. Thanks very much. Yeah.
I think I got kicked off Twitter when I said I was a libertarian. Anyway, I look forward to seeing less taxes. I look forward to seeing more affordability in government. I like to see government lessened. And if you want green policy, want less government, because if the government's using less resources, that means it's using less resources, and it's wasting less resources, and it's greener.
Thank you, Mr. Boudet. So I want to start by thanking the events team here at Business in Vancouver for putting this together, making sure that everybody got in, got their tickets. I'm glad that we were able to accommodate the lineup outside. I want to thank Albert Van Santvoort, who's been able to live stream it all night across our websites and around Facebook. Of course, to our moderators, Neve and Mike from the Courier, Haley and Tyler from BIV, and Lindsay and Bob from Vancouver is Awesome. They've been great. The questions have been fabulous. And of course, for our 8 candidates here who have all given over their time, their great sacrifice here over the next 30 or so days in order to make sure that they secure your vote. We want to make sure that everybody in this room goes out and tells people to vote and basically makes the right choice as a result, perhaps, of what you've heard tonight. Thank you all for coming. Go get it. Thank you. Well studied it.